Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of you for appearing today and offering your helpful testimony. I want to thank the Chairman for holding this hearing, which covers an important topic, one that we need to address from time to time. There's no question that the Department of Defense needs to be reformed so that we can prepare it to address 21st century realities. And this includes a different security situation that existed 30 years ago, certainly. It also includes the need to address fiscal and economic realities that many experts today believe present national security threats in and of themselves. Mr. Walker, I'd like to ask you some questions first. You spoke in 2008 about the striking similarities between America's current circumstances and the circumstances that led to the decline of the Roman Empire. Now, that's a pretty big assertion, and you backed it up by analyzing a number of factors that you think warrant the comparison. You mentioned, I believe, that we're experiencing declining moral values and political civility domestically, and an overextended military in foreign lands combined with fiscal irresponsibility by the central government. And you identified all of those as characteristics displayed by the late Roman Empire and characteristics that we can see within the United States today. Can you elaborate on what some of the precipitating factors are, specifically with regards to having an overextended military abroad that can lead to a country's decline, and tell us a little bit about how the overextension of our military might lead to some of the mismanagement problems that we're experiencing today?
Senator, I think what I said was that we had a decline in moral and ethical values. We had fiscal irresponsibility by the central government. We had an inability to control our borders, and we had an overextended military around the world. I think those factors are relevant, and I think they're reality.
Have we solved all those problems since 2000?
Well, first, I think we have to understand, in order to stay strong militarily, in order to be the leading nation around the world, you have to be strong economically. And if you don't put your financial house in order, then all those aspects, the military will suffer, our position in the world will suffer, our economy and job opportunities will suffer. So we have to put our finances in order. I think the issue is we have assumed a disproportionate responsibility for global security in the United States, in part because somebody has to lead, and thank God it's the United States, in part because others have not done their part, and others have cut back on their allocation to the military, and they've been relying upon the United States to assume a disproportionate share. And I think that's something that obviously has to be looked at, because the type of security challenges that we face today are diffuse, they are global, they do not respect geopolitical boundaries, and we need a collective effort in order to be able to effectively solve it. At the same point in time, as the Chairman and others have said, the United States must lead, because there's nobody else to fulfill that role.
Now, in 2008, you appeared in a documentary called IOUSA. You talked about some of the threats we might face, some of the crises we might face as our national debt continues to rise. At the time, significantly, our national debt was $8 trillion. It's funny how we can look back on that now and say only $8 trillion, because of course that's a staggering sum of money. But since then, our debt has significantly more than doubled. And so other than facing possible insolvency sooner rather than later, what consequences specifically to our national security do you project from this trend if we stay on our current path?
Just to reiterate, if we don't put our finances in order, then everything is going to suffer, including national security. Let me give you something that I think most people don't know. Discretionary spending, which includes national defense, includes all of the express and enumerated responsibilities envisioned by our nation's founders for the Federal Government. All of them. National security, homeland security, foreign policy, etc. That's what's getting squeezed. It's down to 32% of the budget. 32% of the budget. 68% is mandatory spending. 100 years ago, only 3% was mandatory spending. So, you know, we've lost control of the budget. We're spending more and more on consumption, less and less on investment, more and more on non-constitutionally specified responsibilities, less and less on the ones that are. And that's not sustainable. It's absolutely not sustainable. At the same point in time, as we've testified in this hearing, there's a tremendous amount of waste with regard to overhead and management practices within the Defense Department. And so we need to have an adequate allocation of the budget to defense. At the same point in time, we need to improve the economy, efficiency, and effectiveness of the resources that are being allocated to the Defense Department at the present point in time.
That's a great point. I liked your point about the comparison with 100 years ago. And another thing that goes along with that is 100 years ago, we were spending only 2 or 3% of our nation's GDP on the federal government. And so not only has the pie grown, it's grown.
2%. 100 years ago, the U.S. government was 2% of GDP. Now we're, about 21% of GDP. So it's 10.5 times bigger. 100 years ago, we controlled 97% of spending. Congress did every year. Now it's 38, going down. It's out of control.
Yeah, well said. I see my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We all yearn